Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO and founder of Facebook, famously said that part of the reason he became so successful was because he was fortunate enough to have had Steve Jobs as a mentor who regularly gave him advice on everything from the kind of product he should build to the kind of people he should hire. Bill Gates, founder of Microsoft, credits part of his success to Warren Buffett, who taught him how to think his way through problems and how to take a long-term view of business. The Oxford Dictionary defines mentorship as being a relationship in which a more experienced or knowledgeable person helps guide a less experienced or less knowledgeable person. And so valuable are these relationships that they've now become an integral part of many young people's career path. So what you find going on nowadays is that the best students will compete with one another to work for free for a while with some well-known mentors because they recognize the value that these relationships can add to their careers. And that's interesting to me as a student of the Bible, because the biblical model of Christianity is that a Christian should not consider him or herself as being someone who believes stuff, or someone who subscribes to a certain worldview, or, at its absolute worst, someone who doesn't do a list of things. Rather, the biblical model is that we who are Christian should consider ourselves as being in a mentorship relationship with Jesus. And I like that, because it leaves room for all of us. You see, it can be hard to have all your beliefs figured out, can't it? It can be even harder to arrange your life around those beliefs. But learning, failing, trying again while you're failing, learning some more while you're figuring things out, that I can do. I can't subscribe to a model of Christianity that pressures me to pretend that I'm perfect, because I don't do anything perfectly. But I can subscribe to the idea that Jesus is somehow with me in my imperfections, with guidance, with wisdom, and with correction. So in this morning's lesson, Mark tells us that Jesus went up on a mountainside and called to him those whom he wanted. Now, when Mark mentions the word mountain, he's being deliberately evocative. You see, in the ancient world, everyone believed that mountains were where the gods lived. And from these mountains, they would reveal themselves to their people and reveal what it was they wanted. And that's particularly true of the Jewish religion from which Christianity emerged. Since these people were little children, they'd all been told the story of the time when God rescued his people from Egypt and took them to Mount Sinai. And from Mount Sinai, he would reveal to them who he was, what he was like, and how it was he wanted them to live. Now, the reason this mountain talk grabs my attention is because by the time you get to Jesus' day in the first century, the people of God no longer believed that they were really the people of God, because everything in their life was a mess. The Greeks had stolen their culture, the Romans had stolen their freedom, the Jewish nobility had stolen all of their money, and so literally everything in Jesus' day was gloomy and downbeat, and belief was hard to come by. And you can relate to this, can you not? When everything's working, it's easy to have belief. When your life is going according to plan, it's easy to believe that the universe is fair. It's easy to believe that hard work pays off. It's easy to believe in justice. It's easy to believe in God. And most of all, it's easy to believe in yourself. When life is working, belief is no bother. But when life stops working, and when the gears crunch and go into reverse, suddenly belief becomes difficult. Suddenly you can question yourself, your faith, the justice of the world, the value of everything you've ever been taught. And as an aside, I want to say to you for your encouragement, that every single person who ended up getting the things you're trying so desperately hard to get went through exactly the same doubts that you are going through at the moment. Every single person who went through the same troubles that you are going through at the moment went through exactly the same doubts that you've been struggling with all week. Every single person whose life was spoiled by something went through the same doubts that you are going through. And the ones who made it, the ones who got to the other side successfully, are the ones who somehow managed a way to fight through their doubts, to shut them out, and to keep on believing, particularly when belief was so hard to hold on to. You are not unique in these things. Everyone goes through them. And so in Jesus' day, most people had given up on that, but there were a few who didn't. And the few who didn't spoke of a time when God would call his people to a mountain. And from that mountain, he would hit the reset button and give them a new start. And so when Mark says that Jesus called his followers up a mountain, he's not saying that Jesus climbed a mountain and said, hey, come on up here, get a load of this. Let's take a selfie, we'll put it on Instagram, we'll tell everyone how our life is better than theirs. No. When Mark says Jesus called his followers up a mountain, he's saying something deliberate. He's saying this is a new start for these people. The reset button is hit on life, and they will be made new. So that grabs my attention. Another thing that really grabs my attention in this sentence is that Jesus calls those whom he wants. And the reason this grabs my attention is because life typically does not work this way. Typically, you have to show some initiative and prove that you're worth getting involved in. Maybe if you're at the highest level of your profession, you might get headhunted by someone. But if you're at the bottom, at an entry level, it doesn't work like this. So for example, for a student to get into a top mentorship program on Bay Street, that student has to first of all apply. And the ones who are successful in their applications are the ones who are at the very top of their game. Same thing in Jesus' day. In order to become an intern of a successful rabbi, there was an application. It started when a boy was 12 years old. 12 years old, if a boy could recite the entire Torah from memory. If that same boy could prove himself teachable. If that same boy showed signs of potential, and if the rabbi was interested, if he could demonstrate that he'd be successful, and if he was the best, then and only then, he'd get taken on and chosen. But the impetus was always on the applicant. It was always on the individual to do the applying and the proving, and the same is true today. So here Jesus does something that's weird in his culture, and it's weird in our culture as well. Jesus, it seems, doesn't accept applications. Instead, he chooses, as Mark puts it, the people he wants. So, wrap your head around this scandalous idea. The early followers of Jesus did not have to demonstrate to Jesus that they'd be good at following him. Someone needs to talk to Jesus about his hiring practices. This is insane. They didn't have to show any signs of potential. They didn't have to display any prior knowledge. On the contrary, the picture in the Bible is of them living blissfully Jesus-free, almost religion-free, as far as that's possible in the first century, lives. Some of them weren't particularly moral. Some of them definitely were not moral. And right at the height of their religionless immorality, Jesus walks up and says, you're exactly what I'm looking for. Don't have to prove anything, don't have to demonstrate anything, you're my guy. How different is this? And how instructive to us is this? I bet every single one of us, at some point in our religious journey, have been down on ourselves because we're just not that good at it. We're just not, are we? And for most of us, that's demonstrably true. We're just not that great at Christian stuff. Praying is a struggle. Meditation is a struggle. Reading the Bible, who has time for that when there's Game of Thrones on? Morality, even by Canadian standards, much less Christian, is sometimes a struggle. It's just hard to do the Jesus thing. And in the hardness, we find agreement with our doubts. I'm not good. I can't do it. And then all we're left with is pretense. And yet in disarming moments like this in the Bible, we're reminded that pretense is unnecessary. I never thought you were perfect anyway. I'm fully aware of how immoral and how unspiritual you are, and I want you. What do you think? I want you. I choose you. I select you. Beautiful verbs, spoken sometimes to the most unbeautiful people. Then in verse 14, your English Bible says that Jesus appointed 12. The actual word appointed there in Greek means more like he created 12 or he made 12. And again here Mark is being deliberately evocative for his biblically literate audience. These are the same words used on page 1 of the Bible story where God is said to have made a universe or created a universe. And again the point being made by Mark here is that this new community of imperfect, low potential Jesus followers is something that God is creating, and it's a God thing, not a them thing. And I like this. Mark, I suppose, like many of us, is a self-made person. Mark knew what it was to have to get up in the morning and make something of himself, and I know what that is, and you know what that is. And that's a good thing. But when it comes to the faith that we have, it's not a matter of being self-made. It is a matter simply of being made, of being created, of being reset. And this is done, notice, irrespective of how successfully we navigate Christianity. So following Jesus is not about what we can make of it. It is principally about what Jesus makes of us, in us, and through us. And then having made them, he designates them as apostles. So in the ancient world, the right to give something a name belonged to a superior. So for example, if you had a slave, you might give that slave the name toilet cleaner, because that was the slave's function, to clean toilets. I suppose that's still true today. The person who called a refrigerator did so because that was his function, to refrigerate stuff. So Jesus, having made this new community of people whom he would mentor, then gives himself the right to give them a name. And the name he gives them is apostles. And the word apostles is interesting because it means sent out. So Christianity is not thought of in the Bible as being a thing whereby people leave their life and go behind closed walls and hang out with like-minded people who agree with them. It's the complete opposite of that. It's about being that way. And this sending out involves two things, both of which are curious. Notice what he says. I'm making you to be my people. You will be sent out. Two functions. Function number one, that they might be with him. Before we talk about doing things as Christians, the Bible wants us to understand that Christianity is a relationship before it's a task. As Christians, one of the most fundamental things we believe is that Jesus is a person who in some mysterious sense is actually with us in life. And so therefore being Christian involves making sense of that mystery. And I can't explain that because it is actually a mystery, except to say that Christianity is what happens when things are hard for you at work. Christianity is what happens when you struggle day in, day out with difficult pains and strains and temptations and disabling circumstances. Christianity is what happens when you meet a homeless person in the street or a grieving widow in a coffee shop. And it's in these and countless other contexts where Christianity becomes, Jesus is with me, I am with Jesus. How does that change this? How does that change this encounter, this experience, this scenario? Then he says, in addition to being with Jesus, Christianity involves being sent out to do two things: to preach and to have authority over demons. Now this is interesting, because so far in the story, Jesus has only been doing two things. He's been preaching, and he's been going toe-to-toe with evil. Now he says, I want you to do what I am doing. So here's an early, raw snapshot of Christianity. It's about being with Jesus, doing the stuff he did. That's it. You figure out in your life, where you are, in your contexts, horribly imperfect as they so often are, what it is for you to be with Jesus and to do the stuff he did. So being a Christian then is not a matter of believing stuff. It is not a matter of coming to a place once a week and having that stuff explained, vital as both these things are. Being a Christian, rather, is a matter of considering yourself as being in a mentorship relationship with Jesus, in which you are learning how to practice being with him and doing the stuff he did. One of the things, I suppose, that must be nice about having a mentor is the opportunity to sit down and talk about what's going on in your life. I mean, I guess that's how it works, right? When Mark Zuckerberg met with Steve Jobs to discuss Facebook in the early days, I'm guessing there wasn't all that much small talk. I'm guessing the conversations were often very pointed and sometimes difficult. So here you are, and Jesus is your mentor, and it's Jesus sitting in the chair, and you're sitting across from him. Imagine this. And you immediately understand how horrible Christianity really is. I mean, if Jesus is sitting in the chair across from you and he's asking about your life and he's making pointed statements and asking pointed questions, you're sweating. And you're not sweating because there's stuff you're trying to hide from Jesus. You're sweating because Jesus fundamentally is not nice. He is awfully awkward and fundamentally difficult. Right? Christianity is, 10 years ago, your ex-girlfriend screwed you over and you hate her. And here's Jesus sitting in the chair across from you, and he wants to have a conversation with you about hate. And he wants to talk to you about forgiveness. Christianity is, the culture at your work is gossipy and backstabbing, and here's Jesus sitting in the chair across from you, and he wants to have a conversation with you about how you speak and about how you treat people. Christianity is you're anxious about the future because money's tight and good paying jobs are hard to come by, and Jesus wants to have a conversation with you about faith and about love of money. Jesus wants to talk to you about your selfishness, and you hate the conversation because you don't think you are selfish. But the more Jesus talks and the more questions Jesus asks, the more you sweat, and every fibre in your being wants to run out of the room. Part of the reason why I called this series Saving Jesus is because in our culture the church has feminized Jesus to such a point where he is always sensitive and understanding and nice and fundamentally innocuous and absolutely unthreatening. And this is absolutely not the Jesus of the Bible. The Jesus of the Bible is hard and awkward and dangerous. Do you think they killed him because he was nice? Who gets murdered for being sensitive? This is going to sound like a rant. So, don't forgive me for the rant, because I'm not asking for forgiveness, but try and see the point behind the rant. When I was a student, I worked for a brief period in an old church in the West End of Glasgow, a church built by the tobacco barons, and, you know, old wooden pews, stained glass windows, dust in the air, you know the drill. And you could tell from the aesthetics of the place that men used to worship there. For example, none of the stained glass windows had images of Jesus with sheep or Jesus with little children. On the contrary, there was St. Michael slaying the dragon with his sword. There was David standing proudly over the slain corpse of Goliath. There were no quilted banners hanging from the walls. None of that. But what was hanging from the walls were tattered flags that had been carried by actual soldiers in actual battles. And the old hymn books, long since covered in dust, contained aggressive sort of lyrics, like Onward Christian Soldiers. Remember that one when we were allowed to sing it? Onward Christian soldiers, marching as to war, with swords and grenades and big sticks to beat Satan up. It was kind of, those weren't the lyrics, but that was kind of the vibe. And so everything about the Jesus of this older church was no nonsense and unsentimental. But at some point in the mid-20th century, the church began to speak of Jesus in very peculiar terms. Suddenly, Jesus became almost romantic. Songs, for example, started singing about God being close and intimate and safe, a bit like a lover. In fact, one particularly vomit-worthy Christian song actually has the classic line, "Heaven meets earth in a sloppy wet kiss." What? Forcing men to express their faith using words that men would never ever use talking to another man, even if that man they really like, even if that man is Jesus. At some point, Christianity became very nice, very safe, and very sensitive. Just this week, one reporter from the BBC in Britain complained that the Thought for the Day segment on UK radio, this is a 90-minute section on UK radio where a member of the clergy is asked to speak about life and faith. The journalist complained that these Thought for the Day segments are so boring and unnecessary because they all essentially say the same thing. Be nice to one another. And this is so frustrating because when you read the actual Gospels that were actually written by these men, they are far from innocuous. They are far from safe and far from sensitive. You simply don't get a comfortable message from these real ancient texts. So when you sit down in a mentorship relationship with Jesus and you practice in his presence in the moments of your life, as you should try to do, you are with someone, understand this, you are with someone who says things you don't want to hear, who has no patience for your lame excuses and your silly answers to life's deepest and most important questions. Jesus is difficult. Take success as one obvious and perhaps important example. For 2,500 years, the central question of human philosophy, Greek, Roman, everything else in between and everything else afterwards, the central question of human philosophy, the main inquiry of human civilization has been to answer the question, what is the good life? This is the question of philosophy. What is the good life? During our lifetime, that question has narrowed significantly to what is success. So every podcast that you listen to, every book that you read, every seminar that you attend, they all one way or another angle to this question. What is success? And very recently, the answers to this question in our culture have been dumbed down to money, luxury, and comfort. You ask almost everyone in our culture what the good life is and what success is, sooner or later you'll get an answer that's got something to do with money, comfort, and luxury. We're no different. So here you are. You're a Christian. Jesus, among other things, is your mentor. He's sitting in the chair across from you, and he wants to talk to you about the good life, about the big question of our species, about success, about happiness, about la dolce vita. What do you seriously think Jesus would say to you? Do you think it would be nice? You are talking, after all, to a man who at one point in his career got himself a whip and walked into a bank and committed the crimes of assault and actual bodily harm. You're talking to a man who said, a man's life doesn't consist in his possessions. What would that man say to you about the good life? Perhaps that man would point out to you that you are already rich. You are, or you not. I sometimes wonder what our grandparents would make of us. Like if your grandparents could see the home that you live in, and the size of your fridge, and the stuff that's in your fridge, and the car that you drive, and if your grandmother could see your walk-in closet with like all those clothes, they would be so amazed at what you've achieved. You go back 500 years to your forebears. Can you imagine what your 500-year-old forebears would make of the life you've crafted for yourself? They would be mind blown. You go back 1,500 years and the only people who live like you live and like I live, they've got crowns on their head. And people called them Your Majesty. We are astonishingly rich by any standards, and yet curiously, what we're not is happy. What we are is tired. What we are is stressed. What we are is more anxious than we've ever been. And we hear the searching questions of our mentor, the probing statements. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. Are you wrong about everything? He's not nice, is he? And that's just success as an issue. Take almost any issue that bothers us. Jesus is hard. As you talk about your anxieties, does Jesus say, there, have a Kleenex? Or does Jesus say, do not fear? As you talk about the hate that you justifiably carry in your heart for that person and those people because they did those things to you and robbed you of a better past, does Jesus hand you Kleenex? Or does Jesus talk to you about forgiveness and letting things go? As we probe the big issues of life and faith, what is Jesus saying to us? Is it affirming? Or, as a true mentor should, is it actually calling us to a higher way, to a better way, at the end of which lies true peace, true happiness, and the things that really matter in this life? Yeah. Any questions on any of that? Like, if there's no questions, I can rant more. If you turn the video off, it'll be a real rant. Don't you think that as Christianity became more and more innocuous and more sensitive, it became less and less valuable? It became like a doctor telling you, don't worry about your health. Don't worry about exercise. It's all good. You're fine. Jesus says some incredibly difficult, awkward things. And in the awkwardness and the difficulty, somewhere there is value. Not just because it's true, but because difficulty tends to work. The awkward questions and the awkward answers, they're the ones that really count. They're the stories that really end up in happy places. Thank you for coming. God bless you. See you next Sunday.